He thought it would be easy. Shame her, guilt her, pressure her into giving up what she paid for. After all, who says no to a pleading child and a father with money? But when Keisha Monroe held her ground, and the flight attendant didn't just stand by, the cabin learned that respect isn't something you request. It's something you earn. The cabin air was thick with the rustle of coats, overhead bins slamming shut, and the shuffle of late passengers murmuring apologies as they squeezed past elbows and knees. Keisha Monroe moved through it all like a current in still water. Silent, smooth, unnoticed. She found 14A without asking for help, slid her carry-on beneath the seat in front of her, and settled in with practiced ease. Window seat. Left side. Slight wing view. Just as she'd requested. She'd paid extra for this. Not for luxury, but for peace. For the ability to lean her head against cool glass and let the sky wash away the static of daily life. The kind of silence you can't find on the ground. She adjusted the small lumbar pillow behind her, clipped her seatbelt, and pulled out a book with a cracked spine and dog-eared corners. The hum of the engines was still faint, but comforting. She barely noticed the other passengers filing in, families juggling snacks, business travelers answering final emails, a couple already bickering 2 rows back. It was all white noise. The flight was just under 3 hours, long enough to tune out the world, short enough to not require conversation. Keisha slipped on her noise-cancelling headphones and opened to Chapter 5. The words swam quietly in her mind, and for a moment she let herself believe that this flight would be like any other, smooth, uneventful, invisible, until a shadow stopped at her row. She didn't look up at first. She assumed it was someone settling into 14B or 14C, but then came the voice, low, firm, and a little too familiar in its tone of practiced authority. "Excuse me, I need you to move." Keisha paused mid-sentence, her thumb holding her place. She looked up slowly. The man standing in the aisle wasn't angry. Not yet, but he was already expecting her to agree. It was in the way he stood, tall, slightly forward, the kind of posture men wear when they believe their request is a favor, not a disruption. His suit jacket was tailored. His wristwatch glinted under the overhead lights, and beside him stood a small girl, clutching a stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide and unsure. Keisha blinked once, her face calm. "I'm sorry." The man motioned to the window seat, the one she was already in. "My daughter needs the window. She gets anxious during takeoff." It wasn't a question. It was a transaction he believed was already settled. Keisha closed her book gently. Her voice remained soft, but it didn't bend. "I paid for this seat." The man's smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and just like that, the quiet she had paid for started to crack at the edges. He didn't raise his voice. Not yet. The man mid-40s, polished, confident, leaned just enough into Keisha's personal space to make it feel intentional. His daughter stood quietly at his side, the stuffed rabbit now clutched tighter, its ears bent from being held too often. She didn't look at Keisha, only at the floor, as if hoping the carpet might swallow her whole. "I understand you paid for the seat," he said. Voice dipped in charm, but sharpened underneath. "But I'm asking you as a decent person, to help a child." Keisha kept her eyes on him, unmoved. She recognized the tactic, a soft plea wrapped in social pressure, framed to make refusal feel cruel. "I'm sorry," she replied, measured and direct, "but I booked this seat specifically. I won't be moving." His smile twitched, barely. "You're telling me you can't switch to the aisle, just for a few hours?" "She's 6. Keisha glanced at the little girl, small hands fidgeting with the rabbit's legs, nervous glances bouncing between them. It wasn't about her. It never was. She turned back. "I understand," she said gently, "but this isn't about hours. It's about planning. I planned." "You didn't." The man exhaled, one of those deliberate sighs meant to draw attention. A few passengers in the nearby rows started watching with half-curious eyes, pretending not to. "Wow," he muttered, loud enough to be heard. "Just, wow." He straightened, placing a hand on the seat in front of hers, as if claiming control of the space. "You know, most people wouldn't think twice. Most people would do the right thing." Keisha's grip on her book tightened just slightly. "And most people," she said softly, "wouldn't try to make a stranger feel small for not giving up something they paid for." That landed. His expression stiffened, the cordial mask slipping just enough to reveal the irritation beneath. He looked around, as if trying to find someone to validate his indignation. "She's just a child," he said again, louder now. "And I'm just a woman who booked a seat," Keisha said. "That's how this works." For a beat, the aisle stilled. The noise of boarding faded behind the tension wrapping around row 14. The girl shifted her weight from foot to foot, not speaking, not pulling on his sleeve, just quiet. Keisha could feel it, the pressure tightening, the social performance beginning. This wasn't about the seat anymore. It was about control, and while he played the part of the concerned father, she saw what was really there. Entitlement, not empathy. Image, not urgency. Keisha didn't flinch. She leaned back slightly, eyes steady. If he wanted a scene, he'd have to create it on his own. He turned slightly toward the aisle, voice just a notch louder. Rehearsed concern painted across his face. "This is what we've come to," he announced. Not to Keisha, but to the audience he was building. People so consumed with themselves, they can't spare a little kindness for a child. Keisha didn't move. She'd seen it before. The shift from request to spectacle. When logic fails, perform. Make it a morality play. Cast yourself as the good parent, the misunderstood victim. Cast her as the problem. A few heads turned. A man across the aisle lowered his magazine. A woman 3 rows up leaned out just enough to listen. The little girl stared at the floor, still clinging to the rabbit, eyes wide and unsure. Keisha kept her tone steady. "Sir, I've already said no. I don't owe you anything more than that." His laugh was short, hollow. "You don't owe me anything?" he echoed, making sure the words rang out. "Right. Because decency is optional now." She could feel it, the slow boil of pressure, the silent calculations behind strangers' eyes. How easy it would be to label her difficult, cold, unyielding, a woman who wouldn't move for a child. The optics alone did the work for him. "I'm not asking for your legroom," he continued, still facing the cabin. "I'm not asking for money. I'm asking you to show some compassion to a 6-year-old girl who's afraid to fly." Keisha didn't respond. She had nothing to prove, nothing to explain. But silence, in moments like this, doesn't feel neutral. It feels like defiance. And that's what he was counting on. He turned back toward her. "I hope you feel good about yourself," he said, louder now. "I hope whatever book you're reading is more important than helping a little girl feel safe." There it was, the pivot from logic to guilt, the curated outrage. Passengers shifted. One coughed. Another pretended to scroll their phone. No one spoke. Keisha let out a slow breath. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead her case. She simply repeated, with the calm of someone who had spent a lifetime being told to give up what was hers. "I paid for this seat." He stepped back, his smile gone, replaced with something colder. Not anger, not yet, but something edging toward humiliation. He had expected compliance. Maybe reluctance. Maybe a sigh and a reluctant shuffle. But not this, not resistance wrapped in calm. And so he pivoted again, toward escalation. Because if he couldn't win with charm or shame, he'd try to win with volume. The overhead lights flickered once as the boarding process neared its end, casting soft shadows down the aisle. Keisha could feel the weight of the cabin shifting. The man was still standing, arms crossed now, jaw tight. His daughter hadn't said a word, her rabbit pulled close like armor. Then a voice entered the space. Calm, even, professional. "Is there a problem here?" Sandra Wallace stood just behind the man, navy blue uniform pressed to perfection, silver wings pinned over her name tag. Late 40s, short cropped hair, eyes sharp with experience. She didn't flinch, didn't rush. She'd seen this before. The man turned, relief slipping into his voice like a cue. "Yes," he said, pointing to Keisha. "This woman won't give up her seat for my daughter. She's scared of flying. She needs the window." Sandra didn't move right away. She glanced from him to Keisha, to the little girl, then back again. There was no surprise in her eyes, just calculation. She was reading the room, weighing tone, posture, who was seated, who was standing, who was being watched. Keisha met her gaze. Said nothing. Sandra turned back to the man. "And your assigned seat is?" He motioned behind them. "You were given the aisle, and middle, but she won't switch." Sandra nodded slowly, then turned to Keisha. "Ma'am, is this your assigned seat?" Keisha answered plainly. "Yes, 14A. I paid extra for it." Sandra gave a single nod, That was all she needed. Then she's entitled to stay right where she is. The man blinked, like he hadn't heard her correctly. Excuse me. Sandra's tone didn't waver. She has the window seat. It's hers. I can check if there's another available one for your daughter, but I won't ask another passenger to move from a seat they paid for. There was no sharpness in her voice. No confrontation, just policy and finality. The man's face tightened. I'm not asking for a lecture on policies. I'm asking you to help resolve this. I am, Sandra replied. And the resolution is you returning to your assigned seat, or allowing me to look for another available window. But that's not the point, he said, voice rising again. She won't move for a child. She's sitting there like. Sandra raised one hand, a subtle gesture, but commanding. Sir, I'm going to ask you to lower your voice. The silence around them thickened. More eyes turned. A phone camera lifted, pretending not to record. He looked back at Keisha, still seated, still silent, and for the first time, his confidence faltered, because Sandra Wallace hadn't just upheld the rules. She had made it clear, no was not up for negotiation. He didn't storm off. He didn't raise his voice again. Instead, he exhaled slowly, sharp through his nose, then muttered something beneath his breath, quiet, meant to land just below the threshold of confrontation, just loud enough to sting without consequence. Typical. Keisha heard it. So did Sandra. For half a second, everything slowed. The cabin noise dimmed to a low hum, like a warning tone only certain ears were trained to hear. Keisha sat perfectly still, but her fingers curled slightly against the armrest. She knew that word, knew how it was used, and more importantly, when Sandra straightened. Her posture changed almost imperceptibly, but enough. Her spine locked, her hands clasped tighter behind her back. Excuse me, she asked, voice calm but colder now, like glass held over flame. The man shrugged, not looking at her. I didn't say anything. Sandra's eyes didn't leave him. You said typical. Would you like to clarify what you meant by that? He glanced around, realizing too late how many people were now watching. The show he thought he was directing had turned its gaze back on him. Faces were shifting, no longer amused, no longer indifferent. I'm just saying, he muttered, tone flattening. You'd think someone would be more understanding. Sandra took a step closer, voice dropping low enough that only a few rows could hear. Be very careful, sir, she said, implying things you're not prepared to defend in front of witnesses and a captain. Keisha didn't speak. She didn't have to. That word had already spoken for him. It was the kind of word that isn't about what's said, but who it's aimed at. And in that moment, it wasn't about the seat, or the child. It was about the quiet assumption that Keisha should have given in, that not doing so was somehow part of a larger, uglier narrative. The man held up his hands like a false surrender. Look, I'm just trying to travel with my daughter. I didn't mean anything by it. But he had, and now the air around row 14 had changed. The murmurs were different, not casual anymore, not curious. Keisha could feel it, a ripple of recognition. Some people got it. Some didn't. But Sandra understood exactly what had just happened. With a calmness that cut deeper than any shout, she said, let me be clear. You may be frustrated, but you will treat every passenger with respect, or we will have a very different conversation. The man said nothing, just turned stiffly back to his row, retreating, but not defeated.
Not yet.
And Keisha, still in her seat, stared out the window, the glass cool against her temple. Typical. One word, one reflex, and it told her everything she needed to know. The aisle had gone still again, one of those tense, quiet pauses where everyone pretends to mind their business, but no one really is. The man remained frozen near his seat, lips pressed thin, eyes locked ahead like a child, waiting for scolding to pass. Keisha kept her gaze on the clouds outside the window, the soft blue sky, unmoved by everything unfolding inside row 14. Then came a voice. Low, calm, male. She said she paid for her seat. Keisha turned slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse of the speaker. A middle-aged man in a forest green hoodie, wire-rimmed glasses, sitting directly behind her. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene. He just said it like a fact. And somehow, that made it louder than anything else in the cabin. A flicker of movement across the aisle, someone shifting forward in their seat. Then a woman, maybe early 30s, ponytail tucked through a baseball cap, leaned slightly into the aisle. "She's not wrong," she said, her voice edged with quiet certainty. "Seats aren't assigned at random. If he wanted the window, he should have booked it." The man turned, too fast, too sharp. "She's a child," he snapped, motioning toward his daughter, who now sat silently in their assigned row, rabbit cradled close to her chest. "I shouldn't have to explain basic compassion to strangers." "You don't," the man in the hoodie replied, not looking up from his folded arms. "But what you're doing isn't compassion. It's control, that hit. Not loud, but true, and truth, when spoken plainly, has a way of echoing louder than anger ever could." Keisha felt it. The air shifting. Subtle, but clear. The crowd's energy wasn't behind him anymore. It was slipping, quietly, like sand through fingers. People weren't nodding, they were frowning, turning away, shaking their heads. And he knew it. He tried to recover, rolled his shoulders back, added a performative laugh. "Can't believe I'm the villain for asking someone to help a nervous kid." But no one responded. He scanned the rows like he was searching for an ally, but found none. Just silence. Just faces that wouldn't meet his gaze anymore. That's when control started to unravel. He wasn't the concerned father anymore. He wasn't the voice of reason in a rude world. He was just a man, loud, entitled, and slowly being revealed for what he really was. Sandra stood off to the side, arms folded, not interfering, because she didn't have to. The cabin had started to speak for itself. And Keisha, still quiet, still seated, finally exhaled. Not out of relief, but because the tide was turning, and he could feel it too. Sandra stepped forward, slow and deliberate, her heels quiet against the rubber aisle. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Sir," she said, tone firm and level, "I'm going to ask you one final time to return to your assigned seat." The man's eyes narrowed. "Are you serious?" "I am." Passengers stilled again, their attention snapping back like magnets. The hum of overhead fans, the click of a rolling suitcase, the soft beep of a closing bin, all faded beneath the weight of what hung in the air. He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Just resistance. "So that's it? That's your solution? Reward selfishness, and punish a father trying to make his kid comfortable?" Sandra didn't blink. "The solution is simple. She booked this seat. You didn't. I've offered to check for other window seats. You refused. Now I'm offering you a choice." She paused, letting the silence settle around her words. "You can return to your seat and enjoy your flight, or I can notify the captain and escalate this." The man's jaw clenched. "You're threatening me?" "No," she replied. "I'm informing you." He looked around again, hoping for some sign, any flicker of support, but the cabin had changed. No one nodded. No one leaned in. No one came to his rescue. The earlier murmurs had gone quiet, replaced by a kind of stillness that only comes when people are watching someone lose their grip and don't want to get pulled in with them. Keisha didn't move. She sat exactly as she had the whole time, back straight, hands folded on the book in her lap, eyes forward, not triumphant, just present. And that presence, that refusal to shrink, unsettled him more than any argument could have. "I just think it's interesting," he said finally, his voice lower now, more bitter than outraged. "If I were the one refusing to move, you'd be handling this differently." Sandra's expression didn't change, but her voice turned colder. "You are the one refusing to move," she said, "and you've been given more patience than most." A beat passed, then two, and for the first time, something flickered behind his eyes. Not rage, not defiance. Something smaller, doubt. He was used to winning, used to compliance, to people folding when his voice got sharp, or his tone turned righteous. But now the tone of the plane was clear. He wasn't the victim here, and he wasn't in charge. For a moment, his hand hovered near his seatbelt, like he might give in, but pride is a hard thing to swallow at 30,000 feet. So instead he muttered, "Fine," and turned away, loud enough for everyone to hear, but not loud enough to drown out the sound of his own defeat. Keisha had just started to breathe again when she felt it, that shift in the air, the subtle pause in conversation, the kind of silence that falls when something is about to go wrong. He was coming back. She didn't need to turn around to know it. His footsteps weren't loud, but they carried weight, not physical, intentional. The kind of walk meant to prove a point. Sandra, still near the front, spotted him first. Her body tensed, posture straightening as she stepped forward, ready to intercept. But he didn't stop. He brushed right past her, ignoring the low sharp "sir" that trailed after him. And then he was there again, standing in her row, hand on the headrest in front of her seat, eyes locked on her like she'd stolen something. Keisha didn't flinch. She didn't move, but her fingers curled tighter around the spine of her book. "You must be really proud of yourself," he said, voice low, sharp, and meant for her alone. Keisha didn't answer. He leaned in just slightly, enough to violate the space that had already been invaded once. "Sitting there like a queen," he muttered, the edge in his tone turning darker, "acting like the whole world owes you something." Keisha felt her jaw tighten, not from fear, not even from anger, from the sheer exhaustion of moments like these, when dignity is mistaken for arrogance, and composure is taken as a challenge. And then she heard it, a subtle intake of breath behind him. Sandra, she had heard every word, and she wasn't alone. Javier, the second attendant, had quietly moved up the aisle. His towering frame now stood a few feet back, arms folded, expression unreadable. "Sir," Sandra said, her voice like the snap of cold metal. "Step away from her seat." He didn't move. Not right away. His mouth twitched like he wanted to argue, but something in her tone stopped him. Still, he couldn't help himself. "She's not who she pretends to be," he hissed, the words just loud enough to sting. "People like her always find a way to play the victim." That was it. Sandra's eyes darkened. Javier's jaw flexed. Keisha didn't speak. She didn't need to. The cabin around them had gone still again, the kind of silence that precedes an ending. Javier stepped forward, voice low but firm. "Sir, return to your seat, now, and if I don't, we will notify the captain, and you will be removed from the flight." The man looked around, searching again, desperate this time, for someone to back him up. No one moved, no one spoke, not even his daughter. And in that stillness, something cracked, not loudly, just enough. Javier didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Keisha and the man, posture calm but unmistakably final. The aisle behind him seemed to narrow, like the plane itself had no more room for what was about to happen. The man opened his mouth to protest again, but Javier was already speaking into his radio. "Captain, we have a situation in the main cabin. Passenger refusal to comply. Stand by for offload coordination." The click of the mic was soft, but its meaning was loud. For the first time the man's face shifted, not from anger, but something closer to disbelief, like he hadn't really considered it would come to this. Like the idea of being removed from a flight over a seat, a refusal was absurd, unthinkable, beneath him. "You can't be serious," he said, voice thin. "You're making a scene over nothing." Javier didn't blink. "Sir, you made the scene. We're just closing the curtain." There was movement up front. Sandra had stepped toward the cockpit, already coordinating with ground staff. Passengers whispered in low tones. Some shook their heads. A few had their phones angled down discreetly, not filming, just watching, as if wanting proof that it really happened. That a man in polished shoes, clutching entitlement like a second passport, was finally being told to leave. The man looked down the aisle, toward his seat, toward his daughter, now curled into herself, rabbit still pressed to her chest, eyes fixed on her shoes. "Unbelievable," he muttered, loud enough for Keisha to hear, but too quiet to protest. Javier took a step back. "You need to collect your belongings." He didn't move. Keisha watched it happen. The moment it all caught up to him. Not the rules, not the policy, but the fact that his voice, his outrage, his well-tailored frustration had failed. He wasn't the center of the cabin anymore. He was the problem being walked off of it. Slowly, stiffly, he turned, reached for his bag with shaking hands, didn't look at anyone, didn't speak. Javier escorted him forward, step by step, past rows of silent strangers. The cabin didn't cheer, didn't clap. It just watched, quiet and still, as the door to the jet bridge opened. And just like that, he was gone. Keisha didn't move. Her hands remained folded, her book still unopened in her lap. Sandra returned a moment later. "He won't be returning," she said quietly. "Let us know if you need anything." Keisha nodded once. "I'm fine," but fine didn't mean unaffected. It just meant she was still here, still in her seat. And for now that was enough. The cabin took a breath it hadn't realized it was holding. Quiet rippled down the aisle like the hush after a storm. A few passengers whispered across armrests, voices low and cautious. One woman in a ponytail gave a small nod in Keisha's direction. A man near the emergency exit let out a short exhale, something between relief and approval. And then, soft but clear, came a single clap. It didn't build into anything. Just one, then another, then silence again. No ovation, no spectacle, just acknowledgement. Keisha didn't turn to look. She didn't need to. She adjusted the pillow behind her, picked up her book, and finally turned toward the window. The tarmac stretched out into fading sunlight. Planes taxied in the distance. A fuel truck rumbled by. Life moved on, indifferent to what had happened inside. She wasn't triumphant. She didn't feel proud. She felt steady, not because she'd won, but because she hadn't moved. She hadn't shouted, hadn't matched his energy, hadn't folded under the pressure of stares, whispers, or a man's practiced outrage. She had simply claimed her space, and stayed there, and somehow, that had been radical enough. Behind her, the seatbelt sign dinged. Overhead, the pilot's voice crackled through the intercom, standard announcements, cruising altitude, expected weather. The kind of routine that wraps around discomfort, and smooths it over. Passengers settled into their seats again. Some put on headphones. Others scrolled through phones, or flipped open magazines, eager to pretend it hadn't happened, eager to let it fade into the drone of the engines, and the sterile glow of cabin lights. But Keisha knew better, because it had happened. And it wasn't just about a seat. It was about what people expect others to surrender. How easily pressure is wrapped in politeness. How quickly refusal is labeled unkind. How often women like her are asked to be accommodating first, human second. She ran her fingers along the edge of her book, the soft fray of paper, grounding her more than the leather seat ever could. It would have been easier to move. But easy wasn't the point. She had stayed. Not with anger, not with force, just with presence. A quiet refusal to be erased. Outside, the plane rolled toward the runway, tires humming beneath metal. The sky ahead was wide open, streaked with fading light, and the promise of distance. Keisha leaned into the window, not because she had won, but because she never should have had to fight in the first place. Have you ever been pressured to give something up, just to keep the peace? Or watched someone stand their ground, when it would have been easier to fold? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this move you, hit subscribe, because respect, dignity and truth deserve a louder seat at the table.